Honorable members, can we take a presentation? We now have SABC. Honorable Mackenzie, we are now back to session. We now have SABC to present. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson. Honorable members, thank you for the opportunity, and colleagues. With me today, I have the CEO of the SABC, Mr. Mlagwe, Yolande van Billion, who's CFO, acting COO, Sylvia Tladi, and then the Chairperson of Audit and Risk, Yasmin Patel. Then we have Head of Legal, sitting at the back there, Mr. Fanara, and GM in the office of the Group CEO, Christel, they're sitting at the back there. I mean, the financial year we're discussing or we're presenting about today was a very difficult one for the SABC. But the team, in spite of all the financial difficulties, still performed very well. If you look at all the key indicators, they're all showing serious improvement. When you look at the net losses, we've been able to reduce net losses by 35%. Irregular has gone down. Our expenses have gone down. So there's a significant improvement. And one of the exciting things that we finally got the bailout injection of 2.1 billion. We're still short of 1.1 billion. So in essence, SABC is doing very well. We are driving the change, the renewal, the rehabilitation process. And it is very exciting to be where we are. And we are grateful for the support from the shareholder and everybody that supported the SABC. So I will hand over to the CEO, who will then take us through some of the high level, and then after that, the CFO will dive into the financial details. We'll try to do it in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon, Chair, and good afternoon to all the honorable members. I'm going to focus on the salient points on the presentation. The slide one, what we're driving as the SABC is to develop an organization that is high-performing, financially sustainable, digitized, and geared towards the public mandate of informing, educating, as well as entertaining South Africans. The first slide on the executive summary there, it shows that at the end of the financial year under review, we had a cash balance of 72 million. Very importantly, we ended the year with a loss of 482 million. And that's not the whole picture. If you go back 2017, the losses were at just over 1 billion rand. And in 2018, that went to 744. And the past fiscal, we registered a 482 million loss, which reflects a 35% improvement. The next point is revenue. It declined by 3%. That's about just over 140 million. So we registered a net revenue of 6.4 billion for the past fiscal. The other key point for us was the fact that we aggressively reduced our expenditure by 6%, and that amounts to 475 million. But very importantly, if you look at the 482 million loss, over 400 million of that is attributed to the investment in the sports rights area. So it does show indeed that the whole issue about sports rights needs to be looked into. The next slide, we registered at the end of 31st March about 1.6 billion. Which was an increase in total liabilities. These are payables, and these are trade and other payables that we'll be looking into in line with the priorities of the bailout. One of the key priorities for the organization has been in improving our internal controls and ensuring that governance is properly restored at the SABC. And we're already seeing positive green shoots in this regard. Also, in terms of fruitless and wasteful expenditure, that increased, and the majority of the amount reported for the year under review relates to transactions that occurred in prior years, and that's about 63%, and in value it's 141 million. I think one of the significant importance for the organization in turning around the SABC has been the Auditor General's opinion that improved from a disclaimer into a qualifier opinion. And I think it does indeed show that the work that is being put in by the team is beginning to show fruits. I would then want, if I may, Chairperson, to ask our acting COO, Sylvia Tladi, to take us through some of the operations issues that we've achieved.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, honorable members. I'm going to give you a performance review of all our platforms, which is radio, television, as well as our digital media. The performance stemming back from the previous financial year, and I think in this particular area, all our television stations managed to meet their targets. They actually exceeded their targets, with SABC 1 achieving 77.7% against a target of 55%, SABC 2 at 80% against a target of 55%. SABC 3 achieved 62.5% against a target of 35%. And all these local content quotas were achieved, meaning we were able to satisfy our ICASA mandate requirements. 74% of local music was played on all the SABC radio station. And in that fiscal, our listenership was sitting at 28.9 million per week. And we also demonstrated, if we go further down onto the next slide, is that with television, we are still commanding 27.9 million viewers per month. We actually haven't, it hasn't reduced, it's kept up. But it must be noted that there were substantial improvements as well, especially where our news and current affairs are concerned. With SABC 1 enjoying a positive prime time share of 31.4%, we experienced challenges with SABC 2 as well as SABC 3. They underperformed, and this was largely due to our negative cash flows. We were not able to commission and procure content that would move those television channels positively. However, these are the core focus of our turnaround plan, which we will be operationalizing before the end of 2019. And then when we look at our digital media platforms, which was fairly new to the SABC, we actually started vigorously pursuing audiences and listenership on these platforms, I think for about almost 3 years or under. However, we have noticed that there has been substantial improvements and increases in the number of listeners and audiences that we command on those platforms. And these include our mobile news app, as well as social media, where we have YouTube as well as on Twitter. This is another area which the SABC is going to be focusing on in terms of our turnaround plan, where we will start to monetize and commercialize all our content that is sitting on those platforms. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good afternoon, Chair and honourable members. I will be doing the rest of the presentation. I'm not going to touch on anything that my CEO has already touched on, so I'm going to move past slide 13. I'm on slide 14. The purpose of this slide is to share with you what one would call true operational performance of the organisation. Therefore, we exclude once-off and extraordinary items to ensure that it's clearly understood that the 482 million, once it is normalized for these specific items, amounts to 583 million rand. The CEO has touched on the main loss attributors. If we then look at our revenue analysis, 70% of our 6.4 billion rand revenue is attributable to advertising spend, of which about 3 billion is for TV and 1.6 billion is for radio. The main reason why we underperformed against, or the revenue reduced from the past year, but we also significantly underperformed against our budget, is the fact that we were unable to invest in content sufficiently, and the specifically constrained market conditions and competition that the organisation is experiencing in the industry. The radio platforms, however, have been doing reasonably well, with specifically the Fortune 4 stations meeting expectations mostly. Television licenses, that amounts to about 15% of our revenue, slightly overperformed. And we do believe that the collection cost charged to secure this revenue is reasonable under the circumstances. Moving on to slide 16, of our 7 billion rand in expenditure, 25% is related to the acquisition of content, program, film and sports rights. 40% is attributable to our payroll, and the next biggest expenditure line item is 11% on signal and distribution cost. On most of these items, the big ones, we overperformed a little bit. An investment in content, program and sports rights from the 18 year to the 19 year is a good investment to have made, noting that it is far below what we should be doing, which is probably about 36 to 40% of our total expenditure should be focused on that. Payroll a little bit under from the past financial year, mainly as a result of resignations, terminations, etc. We are conscious, though, of the work that we need to do in the area. For interest sake, consulting fees, mainly on SIU fees, our audit fee, as well as some legal expenditure. And then if you wonder why the operating cost line item has increased, that is mostly driven by the Competition Commission fine that we eventually got the ruling on in about September last year. A case that had been ongoing for a number of years and relates to practices in the industry going back as early as the 1940s, I believe. On to slide 17. We did have to make some adjustments to our prior year numbers. As a result, I report on it here. The main contributor relates to a cleanup that we did in our sports rights, where a contract that was signed, I think, in 2015 or so, was eventually concluded in the 17, 18, 18, 19 year. We did a proper reconciliation, realized that we were not allowed to broadcast 2 games, and that a few of them were not delivered as was per the quota agreed. As a result, the organisation had to incur a loss of about 133 million rand. The majority of that relates to prior financial years, hence the adjustments that you see in that period. Moving on to cash flow, the CEO touched on that, the financial position, and I'm now on slide 19. Again, the CEO pointed out the salient features. At this time of the year end, the organisation was clearly under a terrible strain as far as liquidity and solvency is concerned. But however, since then, we have managed to deal with the situation to a large extent. Next 2 slides speak to what the organisation had to do to survive in the past 18 months. It was a combination of cost containment measures. You see 6 items here. There's a report with probably nearer to 40 or 50 items at a very detailed level, where we look at each of the initiatives that the organisation embarked upon. If you, however, look at the next slide, I call it cost conservation initiatives, because in this case, as a result of our limited resources, we were forced to make some serious decisions every day. In other words, we had to delay marketing spend, investment in repairs and maintenance, content, inventory, capital and training, mostly to service our payroll, to ensure that we remain operational, critical lights and water kind of stuff, and a little bit that we could channel towards content we did. If I then get to the topic of financial misconduct, and specifically in this case, in irregular expenditure, indeed, the organisation shows a lot of improvement, but we have no illusions as to the fact that there's still a lot of work to be done. The 41% reduction that the CEO can report or reported on, you see there, from 571 million to the 336 million. And the breakdown of the items. Next few slides deal with a little bit more detail. And before I get to that, just to confirm that the irregular expenditure doesn't necessarily mean that value was not received. Certainly, a supply chain process was not followed as it should have been. As a result, the process can be challenged in terms of fairness, equitability, cost effectiveness, transparency and competitiveness. But as a standard application, as we investigate each of these instances, an assessment on the value received is done. In most of the cases, we have found that value was indeed received, but if not, then the due action is taken. Then we look at a bit of the trend over the past few years. You first see a table on page 23, and then on slide 25, you see it in a more graphical format. I think the important thing to note is that compared to 3 years ago, the organisation has made progress to the tune of about 50% in terms of it's back to where it was, and it has improved significantly. So we have made progress over the years, as you can see. 3 years later, we're less than where the organisation was 3 years ago. But the main weaknesses that we're dealing with in this topic, and also flagged in the AG's report, and it is an outcome of a very weak internal control environment. So a lot of work in that respect, and I'll touch on it. But other than that, the challenges the register has, and which is the same as it was in the previous audit report, is the completeness thereof, our ability to prevent and detect it, and the consequence management. Now, a number of issues or initiatives have been put in place. We are not where we want to be, and we want to get it to a place where your system supports you to the majority of that it possibly can. But it is a whole basket of initiatives. So, for example, the ensuring that irregular expenditure of the past is not only reduced but not incurred today is a compulsory key performance indicator on all of the management performance contracts. We are working very closely with our assurance providers to ensure not only that we learn from them, but they proactively help us to identify. I think all of this, the initiatives that you're going to hear, would have been meaningless if we didn't have ethical leadership, and we're hoping that we are slowly but surely moving closer to a state where that can be said with confidence, and also the oversight that goes with it. There is a supply chain strategy. Unfortunately, in the past year, as a result of the inability to recruit, and a main contributor to the state you find irregular expenditure in is the fact that we don't have people, and those that we have aren't appropriately skilled or experienced in the topic. We are now starting the recruitment, and we hope that we will slowly but surely be able to make progress there. Our systems are also not optimized, our financial system, SAP, for example, and as such we are, I think we rolled out a week ago a system that would help us to address or to identify irregular expenditure at the onset. We have also worked a lot on our relationship with Treasury, and it's a good, strong relationship, so we learn a lot from each other, and they're extremely supportive. Policy and SOPs have been reviewed and updated. Training processes has gone far down the road. We're sort of currently at the end of it, traveling in the regions, but not only training SCM officials, but training the business as a whole, and that process is ongoing. I can't say enough about education in our organisation, a lot of it to be done. The training initiative speaks to that, but also keeping the information current and enforcing the message. And then, of course, all of this we need to embed in methodical, systematic processes and systems, which is also where the AG found us wanting, because we're unable to yet say that it happens automatically and in a consistent manner. And we are aiming to achieve that in this financial year. Noting, I'm on slide 24 now, that since the end of the financial year, we have submitted 3.3 billion rands worth of condonation requests to Treasury. I know it's work in progress, and we hope to have their feedback soon so that we also can learn from that. Then on slide 25, the CEO briefly touched on it. For us to understand what we're dealing with as far as irregular is concerned, we did an analysis of transactions that we report on in this year as much as it relates to prior years, and the little graphical presentation on the left-hand side speaks to that. So about 200 million of our 336 million relates to multi-year contracts incurred in prior years, but which we are still actively working on, and these will be rectified when the contracts are terminated. On slide 26, In this case, we looked at what I call the top 10 contributors because there's specific themes. And you can also, well, I like to believe that even this trend, the 43, that was driven by 10% a year ago, where 63% is now drives the 10% or the top 10, that there's a change in the behavior. And even the 571 to the 336, we believe you can slowly but surely see the change in the behavior coming through. So that is what this slide tries to illustrate. If I then move on slide 27 to fruitless and wasteful expenditure. Now this number showed a movement in the exact opposite direction, from 84 million to 224 million. But as the CEO indicated, and as I referred to in my feedback on the prior year adjustment, 91 million rand of this relates to that item with respect to sports rights. 44 million rand of the 224 million relates to content that was impaired before 2015. So we have cleaned up our content in inventory registers, but in the process we realized that there were 44 million rand that could not be broadcast, what we paid for, but that we could not broadcast eventually, or where the license periods had expired, etc. So when the AG reports on the fact that we did not do accurate or implement accurate steps to prevent these things, we do believe that we have now identified the root causes, and we are able to put in place internal control measures to address these. Next item was the other big contributor to this number. Of the 77 million you see here, interest, penalties and fines, the 55 million rand related to the Competition Commission, once-off extraordinary item with a history as it is included in there. And we spent 22 million rand this past financial year on interest incurred as a result of the fact that we were unable to pay timeously. When you look at the fraudulent payments line item, two items drive that number. There was a banking fraud perpetrated on the SIU bank account, and as such, we lost 1.4 million rand. And the SABC is in the course of investigating that. And the second one relates to a lease agreement where we are paying for unoccupied space, and there's also a process in place to rapidly address that. So if you look at fruitless and wasteful expenditure, which is really that, it's a waste. It is money that an organization like us, in our circumstances, should never have wasted and should certainly never repeat. We have also put measures in place that we hope to address these things. I think in the year to date, the value is probably about 2 or 3 million rand. I'm not exactly sure, and a portion of it relates to interest still incurred. We do recoveries on travel and related matters. It's in place. The process is there and it's embedded. On FID reports, where there's fruitless and wasteful expenditure flagged and recovery recommended, these recoveries are pursued. With respect to the program film and sports rights and the impairments in that respect, we have enhanced our contract management mechanisms as well as the tracking of the progress on properties so that it's predictable and you are able to understand when there's a risk to the license period, for example, or when the contract is concluding, so that you can ensure that you do not or that you lose money as a result of having paid for something that you did not receive. And then, of course, there's consequence management underpins all of these items. Now, and I'll talk a bit about consequence management in a second. I'm on slide 28. Also, just another comparison. Worth noting here, your presentation will report a number of 151 million that has been condoned since year-end, or was targeted. It is, in fact, now a number of 180 million that has been condoned since, so we've been able to reduce that balance as well. Then we get to our audit opinion, and yes, I hope that a year or three from now, I'm able to celebrate a clean audit. For now, we are really proud with what we've managed to achieve, to change our audit opinion from a disclaimer to a qualified. We have reduced our audit findings by 40%. We do have some areas of concern. I have touched on irregular expenditure already. To give you a bit of background on the property, plant and equipment. So we have last year this time the whole theme of property, plant and equipment was qualified because a register couldn't be provided and relied upon. This year the only element that resulted in the qualification is a portion of our assets under constructions. The assets under constructions total 230 million rand. To break it down for you, there are 15 items that are not itemized, 7 that could not be separately invoiced, and ultimately 103 items valued at 800,000 rand was what led to the qualification you're dealing with, noting in the context of a population of 230 million rand. Corrective action here, the asset under construction register is currently being automated, and there's a few other processes which you'll see in a second. On the next slide 30, I would like to share with you what we're doing in terms of consequence management. The AG was concerned with the work that we have done on this topic, or rather not have done on this topic. The main problem is that we don't have systematic and methodical processes to address consequence management. It is there, it is in various ad hoc manners being done in the business, but it is not consistent. So what we are doing is a few things. There is an SOP that is being developed. The disciplinary policy will be further strengthened to ensure consistency in how we tackle the topic of consequence management. We have or are in the process of establishing a recovery committee to oversee the consolidation of all matters related to this topic. Today, as I sit here, all of the managers has on their performance contract a key performance indicator that speaks to both disciplinary actions, reduction of fruitless and wasteful expenditure and the recovery thereof, and the reduction of irregular expenditure. Oversight is an active topic as well. It takes place at the business unit level, at the financial department level, at an exco level, and at the board and subcommittee level. So as much as we are not able to yet embed the theme in a systematic manner, that is a desirable state, we are certainly well on our way there. If you look at the item called revenue management, and it wasn't there a year before. Now, this matter relates to our inability to ensure that we recover all the TV licenses that has been invoiced in a particular financial year. The AG commented that we are unable to, or we don't have effective and appropriate steps to ensure that we recover the revenue. There's about 70 million rand that had to be impaired as a result of the fact that no matter what effort we did and anticipate to do, and looking at the trends in our audience environment, we have no reason to believe that those specific TV license holders will pay. We are currently a little bit at a loss as to how we're going to address this sustainably going forward, because the process to address that is probably a little bit bigger than us, but that won't stop us from doing what we can innovate or create further still. Just to state that we take our audit findings and our journey to improved audit outcomes very seriously. We have an automated audit tracking tool in place with escalation mechanisms, and which is then also reported on at the forums that I mentioned. The next slide, I've mostly touched on it already, and then I'm on slide 32. Touched on a lot of it as well, our overall action plan to address our main topics of concern. I said I will come back to property, plant and equipment. So other than the automation of our register in the top part of the slide, we are also devising a cost allocation matrix from inception of all assets under construction, so that the cost is clearly allocated right from the start. It was one of the main shortcomings. And then, of course, we will implement and have implemented, I think, a monthly preparation of our note to ensure that the supporting documentation and evidence is retained throughout. That concludes my financial presentation.
So Chairperson, really going forward, the focus is to stabilize the SABC and instill sound business fundamentals in order for us to fulfill our public mandate. And the board has given us a period of 18 to 24 months to ensure that we break even. Thereafter, we'll obviously drive profitable growth. And we do have a very solid strategic roadmap that will help us in this respect, focusing on driving growth, driving revenue, looking at the cost base, but most importantly, instilling very sound governance framework within the SABC. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're done.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the SABC. Now, again, guided by yourselves, we're supposed to take 4 other presentations. Honorable Machozi, what are you saying? Yes. No, I just wanted to check. What are you saying? Honorable Machozi. Honorable Kubeka.
Thanks, Chair. No, I'm trying to check with you, Chair, because before we go to lunch, we have agreed, you have asked to say, let all the organizations present, and then we will take the questions at the last. We must just note. I thought it was just like that. I'm not sure.
Okay. I just saw that everybody wants to get on SABC quickly. But, yes. No. I wanted you to wake up. Thank you, Poche. Can we get PBI?
Are we coming back later to deal with it?
Yes. That's why we said honorable member.
I thought we were just finishing and they go.
No.
All
We'll
right.
ask questions.
You are
We
the
said
boss.
we'll present. So they are just moving from the platform of
Okay.
presentation.
Agreed, sir.
All right. Broadband. Honorable members will now take a presentation from PPI.